Hello everyone, this is a video regarding multiple choice questions on the AP exams for US History, Euro, and AP World. All these classes share a portion on the test where you have 55 multiple choice questions in 55 minutes. And this video will basically describe how you should tackle them and what you should expect on the AP test in regards to the format of the multiple choice questions. So, to begin with, what is a multiple choice question on the AP test? Well, the AP Classroom Guide provides this as a description. The questions in the multiple choice section come in sets of typically 3 to 4 questions based on the same stimulus. The questions will include one or more sources to respond to, such as a primary and secondary text, image, for example, artwork, photos, posters, cartoons, charts, maps, etc. And what the main purpose of these multiple choice questions are to test you on your ability to analyze provided resources and analyze historical developments and processes described in the sources. Now, this is just what's off the AP test. I'm going to go deeper into what you should expect and what a typical AP test is going to be formatted as. So, on the AP test, or on the day of the AP test, and in your regular classrooms, you are provided with multiple choice questions as a portion of the test. This is in conjunction with 3 other sections: an SAQ, a short answer question, which is very similar to a multiple choice in the sense that you are provided a stimulus, but you will have to write out your response, a long essay question, and a document-based question. Now, these multiple choice questions, as you can understand, are essentially a photo or a source provided to an individual, and you will have 4 options, and one of them will be correct. Now, on the test, there are going to be 55 questions, and you will have 55 minutes. That means you have approximately 1 minute per question. And this test, or this portion of the test, is going to make up about 40% of your score. Now, I want to reiterate that. That makes up 40% of your score. That is a huge, huge portion. So, out of all portions of the test that you want to make sure you do well on, this is that portion. This and the DBQ together will make about 60% of your test. Now, I've explained this in different videos, but in order to get at least a 5, you need a 70% cumulatively on the test, a 70%. For a 4, you need between a 60 and a 70, and between a 50 and a 60, you get a 3. Now, most schools typically accept 3s, but the better the score, the more schools will take, and the more, or the higher chance you can to remove a class when you're in college by getting a 5 in comparison to a 3, because schools simply prefer the higher score. Now, with that being said, if a multiple choice question and a DBQ make up 60% of your test, if you can perfect score these portions, which it's hard, don't get me wrong, but if you can do really well on these 2 parts of the test, and today I'll describe multiple choice, you have secured yourself for most likely getting a 4, which is technically a passing grade. Anything above a 3 is a passing grade. So 50%, you literally have to fail the test, you will actually pass the AP test. Now, this video isn't trying to simply make you pass the AP test, but put yourself in a position where not only will you pass the test, but you'll pass the test and get a 5, right? That's what you want to get. That's what your end goal is. So, what does a regular AP test look like? Well, the first portion of it is going to be the multiple choice, and that is what I'll now dive into. So, as I mentioned, you will be provided 3 to 4 questions based on the same stimulus. What is a stimulus? Well, I have examples of stimuli here. Essentially, you will be provided a photo, a document, a passage, a map, a graph, a poem sometimes. This is an example of a passage. And essentially, you will have 3 to 4 questions following it, basically regarding that. Now, these questions typically vary. Most of the time, 2 out of the 3 questions are going to be directly related to that photo. As we can see here, there's a photo, and this is from the AP US History practice exam taken. It's free. You can find it. Resources in the description will be provided for people who want to get multiple choice. So there would be resources of practice AP exams, and also test booklets that have a bountiful amount of AP resources for multiple choice. Now, in particular, let's look at this multiple choice question for a second. You have this stimulus, right? So that is always going to be provided on an AP test. You are always going to have a stimulus. So unlike a previous classroom test where they simply ask you a question, what is the American Revolution? That is not going to be a type of thing you see on the AP test. Let me make that clear. You will not be seeing any straightforward questions like what is this without any other provided information. You will always be provided something, not only a question but also a image, a photograph, a passage, right? Just like the AP guidelines said. Now, in context of this, what are you going to see with this? What comes with a stimulus? Typically, 95% of the time, a stimulus will contain a time period and an author. Okay? Following that, as I mentioned, 2 out of the 3 or 4 multiple choice questions will be directly related to the multiple choice question. The other 2, or the other 1 question, will be a bigger grand scheme question, like in this time period. For example, in this photo, you can see the question asking, conditions like these shown in the image contributed most directly to which of the following? Okay? This is very direct to what is happening in the photo. The answer to this would, of course, be B if you have any knowledge of U.S. history. Now, for question 20, as you can see, the conditions shown in the image depict which of the following trends in the late 19th century. See, these are 2 historical skills that the AP test really, really focuses on. Your ability to contextualize things and put them together in chronological order, understanding a timeline, basically. That is question 20, essentially. What is happening in this general time period? Okay? As you can see, it gives you that general time period as the late 19th century. The other question is going to be a cause and effect question, basically asking you, here is an image, tell me exactly what caused this image or what this image reflects and how it affected things. For example, question 19 is an example of an effect question. Okay? So there's really 2 types, and there's actually a third that I have to get into later in the video. It's a compare and contrast, where you will essentially be provided, and I can write a basic thing. You'll be provided 2 secondary sources. 2 secondary sources. What does this mean? So you will have essentially a historical event that is interpreted by 2 different people. All right. So author X believes this. Author Y believes this. Okay. And you'll have blah 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 blah. The question will most likely attempt you, or any question related to a comparison and contrast will most likely try to make a reader or a student attempt to answer this question in a way that they have to compare the beliefs or contrast the beliefs of the 2 individuals. Now, I've mentioned essentially all of the ways that a multiple choice question can appear. So again, to recap, you have a photo of an event taking place. You have a map. You have a bar graph, you will have a poem or some form of literary thing, and you will have a passage or 2 authors talking about a similar event. And I've also now mentioned the 3 types of ways questions will be formatted on the AP test in regards to multiple choice. The first one being cause and effect, right? They will provide you this stimulus, right, the image, and they'll ask you what were the causes of that image and what were the effects of that image. That is something directly related to that image. That is one of the questions that you will actually most likely get. The second one that you'll most likely get is putting things in context of history, right? A much more broader idea. So when you're studying for the AP test, what I can really say is know your history. I mean, there are tips to essentially reduce the outcome of getting a question wrong, but at the end of the day, the best tip I can provide you to anyone really for success on this AP test is know your history. All right, do the reading, because this will help you dramatically on the multiple choice. For the LAQ, you can kind of wiggle your way through things. For the SAQ, you can kind of wiggle your way through things. But for the multiple choice, you really got to know what you're thinking about. And quite frankly, it's not to say that the other test portions do not try to mimic the multiple choice in the sense that they try to get you to explain cause and effect. But like for example, on a DBQ and an SAQ, the document is directly provided to you, right? For this, I mean, although the document is provided to you, there are a plethora of answers that you could be given, right? And you may get it wrong if you don't know what the document is saying. So know your history. Okay? So, as I was saying, you get a stimulus, you get 3 to 4 questions. One question will be a cause and effect. The second question will most likely be something where you put a historical event in a grand scheme. Whether that means looking at it in the century that it was or comparing it, okay, to a previous century. So, for example, okay, and a general one, compare something. You'll be provided a stimulus about the American Revolution, and one of the questions will ask you to compare the American Revolution to the Civil War, because they shared a similarity or contrasted in a specific way. So in that case, you just have to know your history. There isn't much I can really help you with when it comes to a tip like that. And lastly, you will also be getting something like a compare and contrast. Okay, so now that I've essentially showed you what you should expect on the AP test, and you could pause the video several times to see what one of these questions looks like, you can actually try it yourself. So you could try this MCQ here. You could try the MCQ provided here. For this one, this bar graph. You could try this AP Euro MCQ, which is a poem. And you could try this passage from APUSH regarding the Truman Doctrine. Alright, pause the video if you need to, try to answer it. Now, if you had trouble answering this, don't worry. There's a really great tip I can give you. Remember that I mentioned that in these questions you are provided a time period and an author. A time period and an author. Okay? That's going to be very helpful because another way the AP test is formatted, and I want everyone to recognize this, is that 2 of the questions are typically blatantly wrong. Blatantly wrong. You can cross them out. So from 4 questions, you essentially now have 2 questions. Now, this is where the anxiety really comes from people. These 2 questions where they appear to be the right answer, it's just that you don't necessarily know which one it could be. Now, of course, you can guess, but I'm not here to tell you that you have to guess. I'm here to tell you the best way you can make the most educated guess, okay? Or, simply know the right answer. And that is, again, with the time frame and the author provided. I cannot reiterate that. Make sure you know and read the author and the time period of that stimulus. Look at this. The Late 19th Century by journalist Jacob Riis. This talks about British settlement of the 13 colonies 1700 to 1775. That is a time frame. Look at this. America 1820 to 1860. So you're starting to get the rhythm of this, the pattern, right? October 1789 by Paris Market Woman. Truman Doctrine 1947 by President Harry Truman. All right? You got a person and you have a timeline. All right? That's very important, and I'll explain why now. So, when it comes to, let's check out questions 13 to 15. When it comes to the person, that will change the way someone looks at history. Everyone has a bias. Everyone has their own beliefs. For example, if you're provided a question from Donald Trump or a passage from Donald Trump, which most likely you're not going to see on the AP test, they typically don't have multiple choice questions past the 1990s. It's very rare. Most of the time you're going to get it between the time periods from Unit 2 to Unit 8, or the one right before the last unit. That's the most that you're going to get. However, back to the topic, if you were to get a question from Donald Trump or a passage from Donald Trump, you will know that he will have Republican biases. So if you, and remember I said know your history well, if you know the person, then you will most likely be able to understand what they're feeling. So for example, look at question 14. It directly asks you about that. The Posserides, which in this case are Paris Market Women, and other participants in the events described in the song were motivated most strongly by which of the following. Alright, so this is something about the French Revolution, and if you have no idea about it, don't worry, you'll learn about it if you're in Euro or World. But basically the answer would be A. right? An economic crisis brought by food shortages. You would know that because you know that Paris market women are typically very poor. I mean, they don't have much economic ability. All they do really is just simply rely on their husbands for making the money and providing them food. So, of course, if there's a food shortage, that's definitely going to be an issue for Paris market woman. However, if this was a poem about or made by the bourgeoisie, the rich people, this would most likely not be the right answer, right? You would probably have something like the desire to institute free market principles in the French economy if it was from the perspective of a bourgeoisie. So, when you want to really avoid a time crunch, right? This is what you do. If you want to not only avoid a time crunch, but also pick between that 50-50. Remember, the multiple choice, there's 4 questions, but 2 of them are blatantly wrong. 2 of them are very similar. This is where you not only are able to reduce it to the right answer and make the best educated guess, but you are also able to finish your multiple choice quickly. I mean, realistically speaking, 1 minute for 55 questions, it's kind of hard because some of these texts are very, very chunky. I've only provided stuff that are pretty similar to comprehend for the purposes of the video, but believe me, you are going to get questions that are a chunk of text, and that is going to take time out of your test. All right? You need to ensure that you get through this test and you finish it. You want to make sure you answer all the questions. So what I can best provide you as a tip is read the person or read what person is making that statement, because if you are able to do that, then you are most likely being able to understand what direction this passage is going. I know President Harry Truman was against communism, and if this was a much larger text, would I really want to read this? Probably not. I would just know that if President Harry Truman is against communism, he would probably want to restrain communist military power and ideological influence. See how quick that was? That's the beauty of knowing people. Know your people. All right? But that's not only the other that's not the only tip I can give you. Know the timeline, all right? Because although an event takes place, an event happens in chronological order. I'll provide you an example. The French Revolution is between 1789 and arguably 1815 after Napoleon falls. All right? Now, a lot of stuff happens between that period. There is a liberal phase, there is a radical phase, there is a directory phase, there is a Napoleon phase, all right? Now, I have to know the timelines because if I get a question like this, the events referred to the song led most directly to which of the following. Again, notice how this is not only an effect question, but also really the only way I would be able to answer this is if I knew the timeline. 1789. 1789 is when a liberal phase, a more constitutional phase of the French monarchy was happening. The answer then would be A. However, if we look at this, okay, question 13, all these answers are right. The restoration of the Bourbon monarchy did occur. The installation of Napoleon as Emperor of the French, it did occur. The creation of a republican government in France, it did all occur. But they all occurred at different timelines. Creation of a republican government in France happened around 1792. The installation of Napoleon happened in maybe 1799 or 1801. I think he became emperor in 1801. I don't remember exactly, but I know the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy was in the 1815s after Napoleon fell and was no longer emperor. So because I knew those timelines, did I really? And again, this is for questions where the text is very long. I can simply read this and I wouldn't be that worried, but I would not be able to answer this question had I not known that the timeline was the time date was 1789, because that's when the constitutional monarchy in France was. Okay, so again, if you have a big piece of text and you want to reduce the amount of time that it takes you to comprehend things, understand the writer's bias by knowing who the author is of the text. If you want to know what ideas were being influenced during that time period, you should also know not 1789, but know the time date, because if you know the time date, you know what ideas are most present within that time frame. An example for U.S. history would be 1900. I know that in 1900, imperialism are very prominent ideas, and also progressivism is a very popular movement, as well as populism. I know that if I get a question regarding that time period, an answer talking about conservatism or communism wouldn't necessarily be the right answer. And a question regarding the word progressivism can mark my, attention, and I would immediately go and read that question or that answer first and see if that's correct compared to the question. All right. Now, the last piece of help I could provide you is not only knowing the person, and not only knowing uh, the date, but also knowing the act or what it does, right? And again, that really goes down to the fact of know your history, right? I can't really help anyone on that, but really knowing the person and the date, right, will help you. And last of all, if you're really stumped and the text is very hard to understand, and that typically occurs for more early period subjects, like things regarding the Spanish conquest, they may talk about religion, use fancy language. Try to read the first sentence, or the second sentence, or the last two sentences. And I say this because the last two sentences are the conclusion. It's what the author would want you to take out of their information, or the first two sentences, their topic sentence. It's what they're going to be talking about. So if you have a really big piece of text and you don't really want to read that because you're at a time constraint, which you literally are on this test, you would want to read the first two sentences and really just try to comprehend that. Know the person, know the date. If you know all that and can put it together, then you are basically set for answering and getting that question right. You can really reduce your time on that test by doing that. Okay? Because if you can, again, know the topic sentence, you know the main thing the author is trying to argue. If you read the conclusion, because a topic sentence doesn't necessarily make sense, then you know what the author is trying to persuade the person by wrapping everything up. These are literary techniques that people have used in, or not essays, but arguments. So if a passage is from an argument or a political leader, they're most likely going to be structuring the way they say things in that format. So use that format. Additionally, it's always good to know some outside history because, for example, migration to the United States, which the following was a significant cause from 1843 to 1854 shown in the graph. The answer would have been economic difficulties in Germany and Ireland. It it's harder for these types of questions because they're asking for more outside context. So again, the idea of know your history is very important, but the most important things I can say is know the time date, know the person. I cannot reiterate that. Always look at the timeline, 1700 to 1775, 1820 to 1860 for this MCQ, 1789 for this MCQ. Notice how quickly I was able to get through those, though. Alright? It did not really require me that much thinking, right? You could no brain half of these multiple choice if you simply do that. You don't have to sit there and read through so much. Okay? And I would also like to note that this is not a rushed thing as well. Take your time if you need to take your time, right? My tips are made for you to increase the likelihood of getting the right answer. But if you have to read that stimulus because if that makes you more comfortable on the test and reduces your anxiety, do it. Because additionally, you're not necessarily on a time crunch in the sense that if you finish these multiple choice questions, you will be able to get to the next portion. Absolutely not. After you finish these multiple choice questions, all 55 of them, you are still constrained by that 55 minutes. After that 55 minutes, you are provided a break for the SAQs, which will follow right after. But once those 55 minutes are up, you're not immediately moving on to the SAQs. So take your time at the same time. I know I'm saying that this is how you can quickly do things, but it's best to be quick and get 90% of the things right and then have time to go back, then instead of being in complete anxiety, constantly doubting yourself and have no time to go back. And lastly, the biggest tip I can give you is if a question doesn't make sense, do not sit on it and try to answer it. Mark it and go back to it because that will chew up time. This is, again, a time crunch, but also be understanding that if you feel more comfortable taking it a little bit slower, do that. But again, you just have to gauge it as an individual. That I cannot help anyone with, but what I can say is that be a little bit quicker than you typically are. But if you don't feel comfortable, don't. All right. I hope I helped. This is the multiple choice section. If you want to see other videos regarding LEQs, DBQs, and SAQs, they should be in a playlist on my YouTube channel. And thank you for watching.